In the darkest corners of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists an unwritten rule that even the most savage species dare not break. Some lines, once crossed, awaken something primal and terrifying in the universe. The Zephyrian Collective was about to learn this lesson the hard way when they made the gravest mistake in galactic history. They took human children. What followed would be remembered as the day the galaxy discovered why humanity earned its place among the stars, not through wisdom or technology, but through an unstoppable force that burns in every parent's heart. Commander Thakvol of the Zephyrian Collective stared at the holographic display floating before him, his four eyes narrowing as he processed the intelligence report. The bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Fist, hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled war machine. Around him, his crew worked at their stations, their scaled hands dancing across control surfaces with practiced precision. The human colony on Kepler 442b appears to be lightly defended, his tactical officer, Subcommander Yextra, reported. Her voice carried the typical Zephyrian hiss that marked her species. Long-range scans indicate minimal military presence. The settlement focuses primarily on agricultural development and research facilities. Thakvol's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The Zephyrians have been expanding their territory for centuries, consuming weaker species and incorporating their resources into the collective. Humans were relatively new to the galactic stage, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 decades ago. Their expansion had been cautious but steady, establishing colonies on habitable worlds throughout their local cluster. Population estimates? Thakvol asked, his attention focused on the tactical readout. Approximately 12,000 human colonists. The breakdown shows standard distribution. Adults engaged in various occupations, elderly retirees, and Yextra paused, her secondary eyes blinking. Approximately 2,000 juveniles of various ages. Perfect, Thakvol rumbled. The Zephyrian slave trade had always been profitable, but young specimens commanded premium prices. Human children, with their adaptability and learning capacity, would be particularly valuable to the collective's client species who prefer to train their servants from an early age. The commander turned to address his bridge crew. Prepare the boarding craft. We'll take the colony with minimal resistance. Standard protocol. Secure valuable resources, process the adult population for labor allocation, and separate the juveniles for specialized markets. What Thakvol didn't understand, what no member of the Zephyrian Collective could comprehend, was that they were about to cross a line that would unite every human faction in the galaxy. They were about to discover why every other spacefaring species had learned to give humanity a wide berth when it came to their young. On Kepler 442b, Dr. Sarah Chun was conducting her morning rounds at the colony's primary research facility. The settlement, known as New Harvest, sprawled across a fertile valley between 2 mountain ranges. The colonists had worked tirelessly for 5 years to transform this world into a thriving community, complete with schools, hospitals, recreational facilities, and research stations studying the planet's unique ecosystem. Sarah paused at the observation deck, watching as children played in the carefully maintained parks below. Her own daughter, Maya, was among them, her laughter carrying on the gentle breeze. At 8 years old, Maya had adapted to colonial life with the resilience that seemed to define human children everywhere. "Mom, look what I found." Maya's voice crackled through Sarah's communicator. The little girl held up what appeared to be a crystalline formation, her eyes bright with excitement. "Dr. Peterson says it might be a new mineral." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. This was what they had come here for, to build a better future for their children, to give them opportunities to explore and discover in ways that Earth could no longer provide. The first sign of trouble came from the early warning sensors positioned at the edge of the system. Chief of Security Marcus Rodriguez received the alert in his office, his expression growing grim as he reviewed the incoming data. Colony Control, we have multiple contacts entering the system, he announced over the communication network. Configuration unknown, but they're not broadcasting standard identification signals. Mayor Elizabeth Foster's voice responded immediately. How many ships, Marcus? Sensors show at least 12 vessels, medium to large class. They're maintaining formation and heading directly for our position. Rodriguez's fingers flew over his console, activating the colony's limited defense protocols. I'm raising our shields and powering up the defensive satellites, but if these are hostiles, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in New Harvest knew their defenses were designed to handle pirates or small raiding parties, not a full fleet. In a colony school, teacher Amanda Walsh was leading her class of 30 children through a history lesson when the emergency alert sounded. The soft chime indicated a drill or minor emergency, but the red lights that began flashing meant something more serious. Children, we need to move to our safety positions, Amanda announced, her voice calm despite the growing knot in her stomach. Remember what we practiced. Stay together and follow me. 8-year-old Tommy Bradley raised his hand. Mrs. Walsh, is this like the tornado drills on Earth? Something like that, Tommy. Let's go. The children, ranging in age from 6 to 12, followed their teacher with a trust that only the young could maintain in uncertain situations. They filed into the reinforced shelter beneath the school, joining other classes as teachers conducted quiet head counts. Above them, the Zephyrian fleet settled into orbital positions around Kepler 442b. Commander Thakvol studied the colony's defensive posture with amusement. They're actually trying to resist, he observed to his bridge crew. How quaint. The human settlement's defensive satellites opened fire as the first Zephyrian assault craft descended toward the surface. Energy beams lanced out from the small defensive platforms, but they were designed to deter pirates, not military-grade assault vessels. The Zephyrian shields absorbed the impacts without strain. Disable their weapons, Thakvol ordered. Minimal structural damage to the colony itself. We want the infrastructure intact. The return fire from the Dominion's fist was precise and devastating. One by one, the defensive satellites went dark, their destruction lighting up the sky above New Harvest like falling stars. On the ground, Security Chief Rodriguez coordinated the colony's response from the command center. All security teams prepare for ground assault. Civilians remain in designated shelters until further notice. The first Zephyrian drop ships landed in the colony's central plaza, their hulls scarred but intact. Ramps descended with mechanical precision, and armored Zephyrian soldiers poured out, their energy weapons at the ready. The colony's security force, numbering fewer than 50 personnel, engaged the invaders with everything they had. The firefight was brief but intense, energy blasts illuminating the early morning darkness. Human colonists were brave, but they were farmers, scientists, and teachers, not soldiers. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Marcus Rodriguez fell defending the community center, his final transmission echoing across the colony's communication network. Protect the children. Whatever happens, protect the children. The Zephyrians moved through New Harvest with military efficiency. They herded the adult colonists into processing areas, their translators barking orders in accented but understandable English. Families were separated as the invaders began their sorting process. Adults to the left, Juveniles to the right. Subcommander Yextra directed her troops. Process them quickly. We want to be off-world within 6 hours. Dr. Sarah Chun found herself pushed into a growing crowd of adults while her daughter Maya was guided toward a different group. Maya, she called out, trying to break free from the press of bodies. Mom! Maya's voice was terrified, her small hand reaching across the growing distance between them. A Zephyrian soldier struck Sarah across the face with the butt of his weapon when she tried to follow her daughter. Silence, human. You will comply or face consequences. But Sarah Chun was a mother first and a scientist second. She lunged forward again, only to be restrained by other colonists who recognized the futility of individual resistance. Across the colony, similar scenes played out as families were torn apart. The Zephyrians showed no emotion as they separated children as young as 4 from their parents, their efficiency cold and mechanical. In the school shelter, teacher Amanda Walsh held her students close as they heard the sounds of battle above. When the reinforced doors finally opened, it wasn't rescue personnel who entered, but Zephyrian soldiers. All juveniles exit the shelter immediately. The lead soldier commanded, his weapon trained on the group. Please, Amanda stepped forward, her arms spread protectively in front of her students. They're just children. They haven't done anything wrong. The soldier's response was to stun her with his weapon, her body collapsing to the floor as 30 young minds watched in terror. The Zephyrians loaded the human children onto transport vessels with the same care they would show valuable cargo. The youngest ones cried for their parents, while the older children tried to comfort their smaller companions. Maya Chan found herself holding the hand of 5-year-old Jacob Martinez, whose parents had been killed in the initial assault. It's going to be okay, Maya whispered, though her own voice shook with fear. My mom will come for us. All our parents will come for us. Commander Thakval watched the loading process from his command deck, satisfied with the operation's efficiency. 2,000 human juveniles would bring substantial profit to the collective, while the adult population would provide years of productive labor. What the commander failed to notice was the small communications relay that had been automatically transmitting throughout the entire assault. Every major human colony, every military installation, and every government center was receiving detailed recordings of the attack on New Harvest. On Earth, President Catherine Morrison sat in the emergency session of the United Colonial Council, her face pale as she watched the final transmissions from Kepler 442b. Around the table, representatives from every human faction, military leaders, and colonial governors watched in stunned silence as children were loaded onto alien vessels like cargo. They took our children, Morrison said, her voice barely above a whisper. They actually took our children. Admiral James Fletcher, the head of the United Earth Defense Force, spoke with barely controlled rage. Madam President, I'm requesting immediate authorization to mobilize every available military asset. We're going to get those kids back. Granted, Morrison replied without hesitation. And Admiral, make sure every species in the galaxy understands what happens when someone threatens human children. The message went out across the galaxy within hours, transmitted on every diplomatic channel, every trade frequency, and every emergency broadcast system. The human government made no attempt to hide their response or soften their words. The transmission was simple and direct. The Zephyrian Collective has committed an act of war against humanity by attacking our colony and kidnapping our children. Any species providing aid, comfort, or safe passage to Zephyrian vessels will be considered an enemy combatant. We are coming for our children, and we will recover them at any cost. On the Zephyrian flagship, Thakval received reports of human fleet movements throughout their territory. "How many ships?" he asked his intelligence officer. "Sir, our operatives report mobilization on a scale never before seen from the human species. Every military vessel, every merchant ship capable of mounting weapons, every colonial defense force is moving towards Zephyrian space." Thakvol's mandibles clicked dismissively. Humans are emotional creatures. They'll negotiate once they realize the cost of conflict. His intelligence officer hesitated before speaking again. "Sir, we're also receiving communications from our clients. Several species are terminating contracts and refusing to accept the human juveniles." "What? Why?" "They cite concerns about human retaliation. The Altarian Union has closed their borders to all Zephyrian vessels. The Centauri Trade Federation is demanding we release the humans immediately. Even the Krillian Empire is reconsidering their relationship with the collective." For the first time since the operation began, Commander Thakvol felt a chill of uncertainty. The Zephyrians had always relied on other species' unwillingness to interfere in their affairs. If their clients and neutral parties were suddenly turning away, "Sir," his communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting to speak with you directly." Thakvol straightened in his command chair. "Put it through." The holographic display activated, showing the bridge of a human vessel. A woman in military uniform stared back at him, her eyes cold as deep space. "I am Admiral Sarah Mitchell of the U.S. Retribution," she said. "You are holding human children prisoner. Release them immediately, and we might allow you to live." Thakvol laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across his bridge. "Admiral, you are hardly in a position to make demands. We have 2,000 of your young. Any aggressive action on your part will result in their immediate termination." The human admiral's expression didn't change. "Commander, you seem to be under the impression that threatening human children will make us more reasonable. You're about to learn how wrong you are." The transmission ended, leaving Thakvol staring at an empty display. Around him, his bridge crew exchanged uncertain glances. In the cargo hold of the Dominion's Fist, Maya Chen sat with the other kidnapped children, trying to stay strong for the younger ones. She thought about her mother, about the stories she'd been told of Earth's history, of times when humans faced impossible odds and somehow found a way to win. "They'll come for us," she whispered to Jacob, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. "I know they will." Above them, space began to fill with human vessels, more ships than the galaxy had ever seen humanity deploy. The rescue of the new Harvest children was about to begin, and the Zephyrian Collective was about to discover why every intelligent species in the galaxy had learned a simple truth: never threaten human children. The first phase of what would become known as the Children's War was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of the U.S. Retribution, studying the tactical display that showed the largest human fleet ever assembled in galactic history. 147 military vessels surrounded by twice that number of armed civilian ships, all converging on the last known position of the Zephyrian Collective's main fleet. "Admiral, we're receiving additional support requests from human colonies throughout the sector," reported Commander David Park, her second-in-command. "They're offering everything from supply ships to civilian volunteers." Mitchell nodded grimly. In the 72 hours since the attack on New Harvest, humanity had mobilized with a unity that surprised even their allies. Political differences that had divided human factions for decades disappeared overnight when images of crying children being loaded onto alien vessels spread across every human world. "What's our status on the diplomatic front?" Mitchell asked. "Interesting developments there, Admiral. The Galactic Council has called an emergency session. Ambassador Chun is reporting that several major species are publicly condemning the Zephyrian actions, even some that usually maintain strict neutrality. The Admiral's expression remained stoic, but inside she felt a spark of hope. Dr. Sarah Chen's sister, Ambassador Lisa Chun, was humanity's most skilled diplomat. If anyone could turn galactic opinion against the Zephyrians, it would be her. On the Galactic Council station orbiting the neutral world of Concordia, Ambassador Lisa Chun faced the assembled representatives of 43 different species. The massive chamber, designed to accommodate the various environmental needs of its diverse membership, buzzed with tension as she approached the central speaking platform. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "We gather today not to discuss trade disputes or territorial boundaries, but to address an act so heinous that it threatens the very foundation of civilized society." The Altarian delegate, a crystalline being whose forms shifted with emotional states, pulsed with agitation. "Ambassador Chun, while we sympathize with humanity's distress, the Galactic Council cannot interfere in bilateral conflicts between member species." "This is not a bilateral conflict," Chen replied, her voice rising with controlled passion. "This is about the deliberate targeting of children, the most vulnerable members of any society. If we allow this precedent to stand, what species will be next? What children will be deemed acceptable targets for slavery?" The Krillian representative, a massive reptilian being, leaned forward in his specially designed chair. "The Zephyrian Collective has long engaged in practices that many find distasteful. However, they operate within the technical boundaries of galactic law." Ambassador Chun activated a holographic display showing footage from New Harvest. The chamber fell silent as delegates watched human children being torn from their parents' arms, their terrified faces clear in the recording. "Does this look like legal commerce to you?" Chen demanded. "These are not prisoners of war or criminals. They are innocent children who have never harmed anyone." The youngest is 4 years old. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber as the translation systems conveyed the concept of the victims' ages. Many species had different developmental cycles, but the idea of targeting the equivalent of their own young sent ripples of horror through the assembly. The Centauri Trade Federation's representative, Ambassador Veltar, stood slowly. His species had long maintained profitable relationships with the Zephyrians, but the images on display seemed to physically pain him. "The Federation moves to censure the Zephyrian Collective and demands the immediate return of all human juveniles," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of his powerful trade network behind it. One by one, other delegates began to voice their support. The Aquarian Depths, the Silicon Commonwealth, even the usually isolationist hive minds added their voices to the growing chorus of condemnation. The Zephyrian representative, Sub-Ambassador Krextal, rose from his seat with visible anger. "The Galactic Council has no authority to dictate the internal affairs of sovereign species. The collective's actions were taken in accordance with established precedent." "What precedent?" Ambassador Chen shot back. "Show me one instance where a civilized species has deliberately targeted another species' children for slavery. Show me one law that makes 4-year-olds legitimate targets for military action." Krextal's mandibles clicked in frustration as he realized he had no answer. The truth was that while slavery existed in various forms throughout the galaxy, the deliberate targeting of children was something that even the most aggressive species typically avoided. There was something universally disturbing about the practice that transcended species boundaries. Meanwhile, in space near the Zephyrian border, Captain Elena Rodriguez piloted her converted freight hauler toward the coordinates where intelligence suggested the kidnapped children were being held. Her ship, the Maria's Hope, had been named after her own daughter, and when news of the new harvest attack reached her trading post on the frontier, she hadn't hesitated to join the rescue fleet. "Captain, we're picking up Zephyrian patrol signals ahead," reported her engineer, a grizzled veteran named Mac Torres who had volunteered for the mission despite being well past retirement age. "Looks like they're trying to establish a defensive perimeter." Elena's hands tightened on the controls. "Any sign of the children?" Long-range sensors are showing a massive concentration of Zephyrian vessels about 6 hours ahead at current speed. If they're holding the kids anywhere, that's where it would be. In the cargo hold of the Dominion's Fist, Maya Chun had become an unofficial leader among the older children. She organized quiet games to keep the younger ones distracted, distributed the meager food rations the Zephyrians provided, and tried to maintain hope when everything seemed hopeless. "Maya," whispered Tommy Bradley, the boy who had asked about tornado drills what seemed like a lifetime ago. "Do you really think they're coming for us?" Maya looked around the cramped space where 2,000 human children were packed like cargo. The youngest ones cried constantly for their parents, while the older children tried to comfort them with stories and songs from home. The Zephyrian guards showed no emotion as they observed their prisoners, treating them with the same indifference they might show livestock. "Yes," Maya said with more confidence than she felt. "I know they're coming. My mom always said that humans never abandon each other, especially children. They'll find a way." Her certainty was tested when Subcommander Yextra entered the cargo hold with several guards. The Zephyrian officer's 4 eyes scanned the group of children with cold calculation. "You," she pointed at Maya. "You seem to be the one the others look to for leadership. Come with me." Maya's heart pounded, but she stood up straight and met the alien's gaze. "Where are you taking me?" "Commander Thakvol wishes to speak with you. Perhaps you can convince your species to be reasonable." As Maya was led through the corridors of the alien ship, she saw other groups of human children being held in different sections. The scope of the kidnapping was even larger than she had imagined. But she also noticed something else. The Zephyrian crew seemed nervous, constantly checking their instruments and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. On the bridge of the Dominion's Fist, Commander Thakvol paced back and forth, his earlier confidence replaced by growing anxiety. Reports continued to stream in about human fleet movements, diplomatic pressure, and the unexpected reaction from other galactic species. "Sir, the human child you requested is here," announced the guard. Maya entered the bridge, her young eyes taking in the alien technology around her. Despite her fear, she walked with the same courage her mother had always taught her to show in the face of adversity. Thakvol studied the small human standing before him. "You are young, but you appear to be intelligent. Perhaps you can help me understand your species' overreaction to our legitimate salvage operation." "Overreaction?" Maya's voice was small but steady. "You stole us from our families. You killed people trying to protect us. How is that salvage? Your colony was defenseless. By the laws of galactic warfare, we had the right to claim all resources, including personnel." Maya shook her head. "We weren't at war with you. We never attacked you or threatened you. You just came and took us because you thought you could." The simple truth in the child's words struck Thakvol unexpectedly. In all his years of conquest, he had never considered the perspective of his victims, especially not the young ones. There were simply resources to be harvested and sold. "Your people are mobilizing a massive fleet to retrieve you," he said, changing tactics. "Surely they understand that any aggressive action will result in unfortunate consequences for you and the other children." Maya looked directly into his 4 alien eyes. "Do you have children, Commander?" The question caught him off guard. I what? Do you have offspring of your own? Little ones that you protect and care for? Thakval found himself thinking of his own spawn pods back on the collective's homeworld, the young Zephyrians who would someday carry on his genetic line. That is not relevant. It is relevant, Maya said with surprising wisdom for her 8 years. If someone took your children, wouldn't you do anything to get them back? Wouldn't you fight the entire galaxy if you had to? For the first time in his military career, Commander Thakval felt something he had never experienced before, doubt. Not about military tactics or strategic planning, but about the fundamental rightness of his actions. Return her to the holding area, he ordered his guards, but his voice lacked its usual authority. As Maya was led away, she called back over her shoulder, "They're coming for us, Commander, and they're not going to stop until we're safe." In the depths of space, the human rescue fleet continued its approach. Admiral Mitchell received constant updates from reconnaissance scouts who were mapping the Zephyrian defensive positions. "Admiral, we're getting reports from our forward observers," Commander Park announced. "The Zephyrians have established a defensive sphere around their main fleet. They're using the children as human shields, keeping them at the center of their formation." Mitchell's jaw clenched. "They're counting on us being unwilling to risk the children's lives in a direct assault. Ma'am, we're also receiving reports that the Zephyrians have been trying to contact potential buyers for the children. So far, no species has been willing to deal with them. The diplomatic pressure seems to be working. Good, but it's not enough. We need those children back, not just a promise that no one will buy them." As if summoned by her words, the communications officer announced an incoming transmission. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority message from the Galactic Council." The holographic display showed Ambassador Chen's exhausted but determined face. "Sarah, I've got news. The Council has passed a unanimous resolution condemning the Zephyrian actions and authorizing member species to provide assistance in recovering the children." "That's unprecedented," Mitchell replied. "The Council never authorizes military action. Apparently, there are some lines that even the most diverse species agree should never be crossed. Taking children crosses all of them." Lisa Chen's expression grew more serious. "But there's more. We've been contacted by the Altarian Union's defense force. They're offering to provide escort for a rescue mission." Mitchell blinked in surprise. The Altarians were known for their pacifistic nature, rarely engaging in military actions unless their own worlds were directly threatened. Why would they get involved? Because their reproduction cycle involves communal child-rearing. The idea of children being separated from their protective community is as horrifying to them as it is to us, maybe more so. Before Mitchell could respond, her tactical officer interrupted. "Admiral, we're detecting new signatures on long-range sensors. Multiple fleets approaching our position. Zephyrian reinforcements?" "No, ma'am. The signatures are diverse. I'm reading Altarian crystal ships, Centauri trade vessels refitted for combat, even what appears to be a Krillian battle group." As the Admiral watched her tactical display, she witnessed something that had never happened in recorded galactic history. Ships from dozens of different species were converging on the human rescue fleet, not to oppose them, but to join them. "My God," she whispered, "they're all coming to help." The communications board lit up with incoming messages from fleet commanders representing species that had rarely cooperated on anything, all offering assistance in recovering the human children. Commander Thakval stared at his own sensors in growing disbelief. "How many ships?" he asked his tactical officer. "Sir, our count is now over 400 vessels representing at least 20 different species. They're maintaining formation with the human fleet, but not showing hostile intentions toward each other. That's impossible. Half those species are traditional enemies." Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel. They're requesting you accept their surrender terms. Thakvol's mandibles clicked in anger. Surrender terms? We hold their young. They should be negotiating for the children's lives, not demanding our surrender. But as he looked at the massive fleet assembled against him, Commander Thakvol began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't just attacked a single human colony. He had committed an act that united the entire galaxy against him. In a cargo hold, Maya Chan felt a tremor run through the ship's hull. The other children looked around nervously as the vibrations continued. "What's happening?" asked little Jacob Martinez, clinging to Maya's hand. Maya smiled for the first time since their capture. "I think our parents have arrived." The final confrontation was about to begin, and the galaxy was about to learn why some bonds between species and their young transcend all political and cultural boundaries. The bridge of the UES Retribution had become the de facto command center for the most diverse military coalition in galactic history. Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood before a holographic display showing the tactical positions of over 400 vessels from 23 different species, all united by a single purpose: recovering the human children held by the Zephyrian Collective. "Admiral, we're receiving the final position reports from all fleet elements," Commander Park announced. "The Altarian crystal ships are maintaining position off our starboard flank. The Krillian battle group is holding the port approach, and the Centauri forces have completed their encirclement pattern." Mitchell nodded, still amazed by the sight. In the center of her display, the Zephyrian fleet huddled in a defensive formation around their flagship, the Dominion's Fist. Long-range sensors confirmed what intelligence had suspected. The human children were being held aboard the command vessel, making any direct assault impossible without risking their lives. "Status report from the diplomatic team?" Mitchell asked. "Ambassador Chun is coordinating with the council mediators. They've established communication with Commander Thakvol, but he's refusing to consider anything except a complete withdrawal of all forces." The Admiral studied the tactical situation. The Zephyrians were outnumbered 50-1. Surrounded by species that had never cooperated before, and facing universal condemnation throughout the galaxy. Yet they continued to hold fast, using the children as their shield. "Ma'am, incoming transmission from the Altarian command ship," the communications officer reported. "Admiral Zentari requests permission to address the fleet." "Put her through to all vessels," Mitchell ordered. The holographic display shifted to show the bridge of an Altarian crystal ship. Admiral Zentari, her translucent form shifting through various hues of blue and green, addressed the assembled fleet commanders in her melodic voice. "Fellow warriors of the stars," she began, her words automatically translated for each species' understanding. "Today we stand united not by conquest or territorial gain, but by something far more precious. We fight for the most fundamental right of any civilized species, the protection of our young." Murmurs of agreement echoed across the communication channels as dozens of alien commanders nodded their various forms of heads. "The Altarian Union has maintained peaceful relations with all species for over 2 centuries, Zentari continued. "But today, we remember that sometimes peace must be defended with strength. These human children are not merely casualties of war. They are innocents taken from their families, torn from their communities, reduced to cargo by those who have forgotten what it means to be civilized." Admiral Mitchell felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the historical significance of the moment. For the first time in galactic history, multiple species were working together not for trade, not for mutual defense, but for a purely moral cause. "The Altarian fleet stands ready to support the rescue operation," Zentari concluded. We will not abandon these children to their captors. Similar declarations followed from other fleet commanders. The Krillian Admiral Corax, his massive reptilian form imposing even through the hologram, spoke with surprising gentleness about his own species' protective instincts toward their hatchlings. The Centauri Trade Federation's military coordinator pledged the full resources of their merchant fleet, converted to warships for this single mission. On the Dominion's Fist, Commander Thakval watched the growing coalition with increasing desperation. His tactical officers provided constant updates on the encroaching forces, each report worse than the last. "Sir, we're now detecting energy signatures indicating the presence of Aquarian depth charges," Subcommander Yextra reported. "They've somehow transported their weapons through the vacuum of space." The Silicon Commonwealth has deployed computational warfare platforms, another officer added. "They're attempting to infiltrate our computer systems." Thakval's 4 eyes darted between the various tactical displays. Every few minutes, another species joined the coalition against him. Some he had never even heard of, drawn by news of the collective's actions. "Commander," his communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving another transmission from the human fleet. They're demanding our unconditional surrender." "Impossible." Thakval slammed his scaled fist against his command chair. "We hold their young. They cannot risk a direct assault." But even as he spoke the words, doubt crept into his voice. The humans had already demonstrated that they were willing to mobilize their entire species for this rescue. The other alien races had abandoned profitable relationships with the collective to support the human cause. Perhaps he had underestimated the lengths to which these species would go to protect children. In the cargo hold, Maya Chun continued her role as protector and organizer among the captive children. The fear that had initially paralyzed many of them had been replaced by a strange calm as the older children began to realize that something unprecedented was happening outside their prison. "Maya," whispered 15-year-old Alex Patterson, who had become her lieutenant among the older children. "The guards seem really nervous. They keep talking in their language, but they sound scared." Maya nodded. She had noticed it too. The Zephyrian guards, who had initially treated them with cold indifference, now watched their prisoners with what could only be described as anxiety. Some had stopped making eye contact entirely. "Something's changed," she agreed quietly. I think maybe the whole galaxy is angry about what they did to us." Her words proved prophetic when Subcommander Yextra entered the cargo hold with a squad of guards. But instead of the confident authority she had displayed before, the Zephyrian officer seemed uncertain, almost hesitant. "Human juveniles," she announced, her translator converting her hissing speech into English. "You will be moved to more secure accommodations. Remain calm and comply with all instructions." But as the guards began organizing the children into smaller groups, Maya noticed something crucial. They were being extraordinarily careful not to harm any of the prisoners. Even the youngest children, who cried and resisted, were handled with a gentleness that surprised Maya. "They're scared," she realized. "They know they've made a terrible mistake, and now they're afraid of what will happen if they hurt us." The revelation gave her an idea that was either brilliant or incredibly dangerous. "Subcommander," Maya called out, her young voice carrying clearly across the cargo hold. "I want to talk to your commander again." Yextra's 4 eyes focused on the human child. "That is not possible. Commander Thakval is engaged in fleet operations." "Then you need to tell him something from me," Maya said, stepping forward despite the weapons pointed at her. "Tell him that the whole galaxy is watching now. Tell him that every species out there has children of their own, and they all understand what he's done to us." The subcommander's expression showed confusion, but Maya pressed on. Tell him that this isn't just about humans anymore. It's about every parent in the galaxy who looks at us and sees their own children. It's about every species that has ever protected their young from danger. Around the cargo hold, other children began to stand up, supporting Maya's words. Even the youngest ones seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Tell your commander, Maya continued, her 8-year-old voice carrying the weight of absolute moral certainty, that he can surrender now and maybe live with what he's done, or he can keep fighting and discover what happens when you make the entire galaxy into your enemy. Sub-Commander Yextra stared at the human child for a long moment, then turned and left the cargo hold without another word. On the bridge, Thakvol listened to his subordinates report with growing unease. The words of a mere juvenile should have meant nothing to him, but they echoed thoughts he had been trying to suppress. "Sir," his intelligence officer interrupted, "we're receiving reports from our operatives throughout the galaxy. The reaction to our operation has been extensive." "Explain." "Several species have enacted immediate trade embargoes against the collective. The hive minds have declared us conceptually offensive to their group consciousness. The machine intelligence has classified us as a logical error that requires correction." Thakvol felt his certainty crumbling. "What about our traditional allies? The Raider clans? The Void Hunters?" "Sir, the Raider clans have issued a statement distancing themselves from our actions. They claim that even their code of conduct prohibits targeting juveniles. The Void Hunters have gone silent completely." For the first time in his military career, Commander Thakvol found himself completely alone. Even the most aggressive species in the galaxy had abandoned him, disgusted by his actions. "Sir," his communications officer added quietly, "we're also receiving personal messages from crew members' families on the homeworlds. They're asking us to end this and return the human children." The commander looked around his bridge at his loyal officers, seeing doubt and shame in their expressions. These were hardened military veterans who had participated in dozens of conquests, but the sight of terrified human children being torn from their parents had shaken them in ways that conventional warfare never could. Outside his ship, the coalition fleet had grown to over 500 vessels. Admiral Mitchell coordinated with commanders from species that had never spoken to each other before, united by their shared revulsion at the Zephyrians' actions. "Admiral," Commander Park reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian flagship. They're requesting terms for negotiation." Mitchell exchanged glances with the other human officers on her bridge. After days of refusing to consider anything except complete withdrawal, the Zephyrians were finally ready to talk. "Put Commander Thakvol through to all fleet elements," she ordered. "I want every species to hear this." The holographic display showed the Zephyrian bridge, where Commander Thakvol sat slumped in his command chair. The arrogance that had marked his earlier transmissions was gone, replaced by the haunted expression of someone who had finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. "Admiral Mitchell," he began, his voice transmitted to hundreds of ships representing dozens of species. "The Zephyrian Collective is prepared to discuss terms for the return of the human juveniles." "There are no terms to discuss," Mitchell replied coldly. "You will immediately transfer all human children to our vessels, unharmed. You will provide medical assistance to any child requiring treatment. And you will surrender yourself and your crew for prosecution under galactic law." "You cannot guarantee our safety if we surrender," Thakvol protested. "Some of these species are traditional enemies of the collective." It was Admiral Zentari who answered, her crystalline form shimmering with barely contained anger. "Commander Thakvol, you mistake us for creatures like yourself. We do not wage war on those who surrender, and we do not target children regardless of their species. The Krillian Admiral Korax added his massive voice to the conversation. The Krillian Empire has never harmed juvenile members of any species, even during active warfare. We find your actions incomprehensible and disgusting. One by one, other fleet commanders voiced their agreement. The collective had crossed a line so fundamental that even their traditional enemies were united in condemning them. Commander Thakvol realized that he faced a choice between certain destruction and possible mercy. The massive fleet surrounding him could obliterate his forces in minutes, but they were holding back purely to protect the human children aboard his ship. "Very well," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. We surrender unconditionally. The human juveniles will be transferred to your vessels immediately." The words echoed across the communication channels, transmitted to hundreds of ships and dozens of species. For a moment, there was absolute silence as the historical significance of the moment sank in. Then Admiral Mitchell spoke, her voice carrying the authority of her species and the gratitude of every parent in the galaxy. "Begin the transfer immediately. And, Commander Thakvol, you're about to discover that showing mercy to children is what separates civilized beings from monsters." The rescue operation began immediately. Human medical ships moved in to receive the children, while representatives from other species provided additional support. The Altarians contributed their advanced healing crystals, the Centauri provided emergency supplies, and the Krillians offered their services as neutral observers to ensure fair treatment of all parties. Maya Chun was among the first children transferred to the human vessels. As she walked across the docking bridge between the Zephyrian ship and the UES Mercy, she turned back once to look at the alien vessel that had been their prison. Subcommander Yextra stood at the airlock, watching the human children leave. For just a moment, their eyes met, and Maya saw something she had never expected to see in a Zephyrian: regret. "I'm sorry," Yextra said quietly, the words barely audible through her translator. Maya nodded once, then stepped aboard the human ship where her mother waited with tears streaming down her face. The reunion between Dr. Sarah Chun and her daughter lasted several minutes, neither willing to let go of the other. Around them, similar scenes played out as 2,000 human children were reunited with the families they had feared they would never see again. In the days that followed, the galaxy watched as the Zephyrian Collective faced the consequences of their actions. The Galactic Council voted to impose the strongest sanctions in galactic history, cutting off all trade and diplomatic relations with the Collective. The species that had participated in the rescue operation formed an unprecedented alliance dedicated to preventing similar atrocities in the future. Commander Thakvol and his senior officers were transported to a neutral facility for trial. As he sat in his cell, he reflected on the words of the human child who had tried to warn him. Maya Chun had understood something that his military training had never taught him: that some bonds transcended species, politics, and even survival instincts. The trial became a sensation throughout the galaxy, broadcast to every inhabited world. For the first time, species that had never communicated before found themselves united in their condemnation of the Collective's actions. The phrase "they took children" became a universal expression of outrage that needed no translation. 3 months later, Maya Chun stood before the Galactic Council as the youngest being ever to address the assembly. Her words, spoken in the simple language of childhood, resonated across species barriers and cultural differences. "We learned something during our time as prisoners," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "We learned that when someone threatens children, it doesn't matter what species they belong to. Parents are parents and children are children everywhere in the galaxy. She looked up at the assembled delegates, representatives of 43 different species who had found common ground in their shared desire to protect the innocent. The beings who took us thought we were just cargo, just things they could sell. But you showed them that we're not things. We're someone's daughters and sons, someone's hope for the future. And you show them that there are some lines that nobody should cross. As Maya spoke, delegates throughout the chamber found themselves thinking of their own offspring, their own young ones who depended on the adult world for protection. The human concept of childhood, once seen as a peculiarity of their species, was suddenly understood as something universal and sacred. The Galactic Council's response was swift and unprecedented. The Children's Protection Accords were ratified by unanimous vote, establishing universal protections for juvenile members of all species. The rescue fleet was officially recognized as the Galactic Children's Defense Force, with Admiral Mitchell as its first commander. Commander Thakval was sentenced to life imprisonment, but it was the social death of his species that proved the more lasting punishment. The Zephyrian Collective found itself completely isolated, shunned by every other space-faring civilization. Within a decade, internal pressure from their own population forced them to abandon their aggressive expansion and release all sentient beings held in bondage. Years later, when historians studied the events surrounding the New Harvest incident, they struggled to explain how the kidnapping of 2,000 human children had transformed galactic civilization. The answer, they eventually concluded, lay in the universal nature of parental love and the protection of innocence. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior technology or military might, but by demonstrating a simple truth, that some bonds are stronger than politics, stronger than profit, and strong enough to unite an entire galaxy in defense of those who cannot defend themselves. Maya Chun grew up to become humanity's youngest ambassador, specializing in interspecies child welfare programs. She often told audiences that the most important lesson from her childhood ordeal was not about the evil that some beings were capable of, but about the good that emerged when different species worked together for a common cause. They took us because they thought nobody would care enough to stop them, she would say. They were wrong. The whole galaxy cared, and the whole galaxy came to bring us home. The Children's War, as it came to be known, lasted only a few days of actual combat. But its legacy shaped galactic civilization for generations, establishing the principle that the protection of children was not just a species responsibility, but a universal obligation that transcended all other considerations. And in the deepest reaches of space, where new civilizations were just beginning to reach for the stars, the story of the human children and the galaxy that united to save them became legend, a reminder that even in the vast darkness between worlds, some lights burn bright enough to guide everyone home.